Like, okay, gotta make sure that I'm extra safe and not doing anything stupid because I don't want to lose my footing and like, break a bone or something because
you don't want to get eaten by mosquitoes.
Because you don't want to get eaten by mosquitoes, and then you also don't want to have to initiate search and rescue. But the mosquitoes thing is valid, Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie.
And I'm Molly.
And you're listening to the Two Sisters on Adventures podcast. The organ sampler package, The Table.
Part 2.
And
Day 2.
Molly has something she wants to ask you.
I just wanted to say that we've appreciated all your support, and if you enjoy what you're listening to, please consider giving us a rating and review on the platform of your choice. Now it's time for more of The Table.
The Table. So,
What?
This was our earliest morning that we've ever gotten up on trail that we can think of. Like, I think Molly was already up and taking 5:30. She's taking photos at like 5:30.
I really wanted to see just an epic sunrise. And once again, Oregon, it does this to me more often than not, where it's like, oh, someone turned on the lights and now the sun is up without the like real dramatic grandeur of the, fiery sunrise. So I was up to take pictures and try to see what I could see. But a little bit before sunrise, but also I think Rachel had a project or something she wanted to do that afternoon. So we really slid this trip into like a 24-hour slot. Actually less. It was like a 22-hour slot. And Carrie and I guess we knew we loved this hike so much, but after recording our first episode, we're just like, wow, we actually do need to go back there at some point.
There's a different off-trail route that I want to take that's like an old Native American passage trail, so we'll see if I actually do that.
And so we wanted to go to this area, and it was, I don't know, for us, it's so meaningful for us to go to these places, even if it only is for 1 day or 2 days or whatever. Like, we'd rather go and experience it than like put it off until we had 5 days to kind of commit to it. So if I were to go back again, would I stay longer? Maybe. There's so many things to see. But yeah, so we had an early start just so we could get up and enjoy the table. So...
Well, I was just going to say, so you got out of the tent first, and I was like, I'll get out in a couple of minutes. And then I remember I got out, and I was like, oh my gosh, what if I can never find her on here? Because like I said, it's so big and open that it makes you feel like, oh, I could wander anywhere and come back. And then you're like, whoa, where am I all of a sudden? But luckily, you also can see Mount Jefferson all the time, so you have a pretty good, like, you can place yourself. But then I was like, wow, I don't actually know if I can find Molly again. And so I think I wandered to like the westernmost point on the lower table, and you were over there because you were kind of checking out the higher portion of the table, which we'll just call upper table for the purpose of this podcast. We wanted to go up there to see a different view. So I think we were kind of trying to check and see if there was a spot that looked like it had a better grade, because all of that is like greater than 55 degrees half the time. And so I think that you had kind of checked that out and said you didn't see a route that you wanted to do that day. We didn't have enough time, but you were like, come look at this. And you showed me this area that's the cathedral rocks. And so it's kind of cool because you can see that area from Pamelio Lake, right?
Yeah.
And so we'd seen it from Pamelio Lake the day or 2 days prior. And then here we were kind of standing on this, the top of this dome, which is part of the makeup of Cathedral Rocks, looking down. And that is a sheer cliff. It's so cool.
And then other cool things on the table just from kind of wandering around that morning there are a couple different tarns up there as well. And they probably do hold water for the entire year. They might dry out depending.
I wouldn't rely on it.
Yeah, very true. But I've never seen mountains so clearly reflected as I've seen in the Mount Jefferson Wilderness. I'm thinking of Shale Lake. I'm thinking of Bays Lake. I'm thinking of also these tarns on the table. So I have this picture where the mountain is reflected so clearly in the tarn that it actually looks like that is the picture of the mountain. Like the actual real mountain in the sky does not look as clear as its reflection. So it was just beautiful. We wandered around and there was some Indian paintbrush, and I've never seen it anywhere else that I can think of, but there were variations in the color, including one that was a pink color and then another one that was basically white. And so that was just beautiful to look at all the different wildflowers there. And I'm curious if that has to do with maybe the soil type or acidity. Like, I don't even know.
Didn't we see some Indian paintbrush like in California that was a really dark red that we thought was a different color from what we'd seen?
I think we've seen, yes, this deep dark red, the kind of the standard red, and then orange are like the varieties we're accustomed to. But this white color, we'll post a picture of it. It was just so gorgeous. So was Rachel also kind of wandering around with us?
So she eventually also came and met up with us, and I feel like we were all like, yay, everyone found each other. And we all just kind of wandered around and enjoyed this expanse and took pictures of the mountain. And then I think eventually we kind of were like, well, time to go break up camp. And
I tracked my walk to the west side of the table and back on my GPS, and I think it said about 3/4 of a mile out and back. So if I were to kind of estimate it, I'd say that in width, like east to west, the table must be like at least a half a mile wide, if not a little bit more. And then other areas of interest, once again, if we do go back at some point, we will make it to upper table, because that's just like another plateau above the lower one with a little bit better view of Mount Jefferson unrestricted, with some more tarns up there. And then we were talking and looking at a map, and maybe the third table that one article Carrie was looking at was referencing to is kind of, if you're going towards Mount Jefferson, there's a peak called Goat Peak that some people will climb, or some people will kind of do that on their way up to a climb of Mount Jefferson, I believe. And so there's another kind of plateau area if you were going north up towards the mountain. So really, if you wanted to make the Table Lake a home base for a multi-day backpacking trip to do a lot of different day hikes, you could probably see some very cool kind of untouched terrain, which is just gorgeous.
Yeah, definitely. And so we definitely just kind of enjoyed all of those sites, because you're very high when you're on the table, so you actually have a great viewpoint. And I think that one thing that Molly and I probably would both agree on is that for us, the Mount Jefferson Wilderness was the closest wilderness area to where we lived in Oregon. And when we first started hiking, it was where we spent a huge amount of time. And since then, we've spent, probably a greater amount of time in other areas. But I feel like, for whatever reason, to me, the Mount Jefferson Wilderness is just like the most special area in Oregon. It feels the most homey to me, which sounds like a weird thing to say about mountains, but it's like a place where I feel like I can recognize all the geological features. I can be like, there's Coffin Mountain, there's the 3 pyramids, and I like understand its formation a little bit more. And I love that area. And so it was so special to get to see another face of the mountain and to get to understand, like, one thing that you don't know about Mount Jefferson until you've seen it from different angles is it is one of those peaks that is different from every angle. And I know that,
like every peak,
well, I was saying, I know that everyone is different, but Mount Jefferson to me is especially crazy different, because there's one angle where you can see it and it looks like there's like 5 jagged peaks. There's one angle where you see it and it looks like it's just that one consolidated peak. And so I loved to have gone to the other side of it the day, like a couple days prior, to see that, and then to come onto this other side and see this whole new face of it. It's just stunning. And to me, I love the quieter, remote places like that. And I think that and the Glacier Peak Wilderness in Washington would basically be those 2 places for me on the West Coast.
As Carrie mentioned, we started to pack up our campsite, and inevitably, as we say every single episode of the podcast, it's time to dig a cat hole. So
we should have a theme song for that.
We should. We'll create that and get back to you. So I went to dig my cat hole, and like I mentioned the day before, it was like, initially the mosquitoes wouldn't give you trouble if you were moving, but then if you stayed in one place for more than like 2 minutes, then they found you and they were ready to attack you. So I dug my cat hole, and then unfortunately I had to stay in that area to do my business because that's where my cat hole was. So I remember it's like I'm like squatting there, and I could see my own shadow, and I could see the shadow of like 25 mosquitoes hovering around me, and you're like kind of like slapping your leg and you're trying to get everything taken care of. And when I got home, I had so many mosquito bites on my butt that it was just like a whole nother level. Oh, God.
So I think the thing was, in the morning it was a little cooler, so there weren't a ton of mosquitoes everywhere. And all of a sudden, like once it started getting hot, they were just boom, voracious and ready to go. And we were probably the only fresh meat around for miles.
And so Rachel and I like we're like almost ready to put our packs on, so we do like one more like really good coating with the mosquito spray, and when Rachel's spraying it, we realize that now our second can is totally empty. So it's 7:30 a.m. We've got 11 and a half miles to hike back to the trailhead. The mosquitoes are bad, and we are all out of bug spray.
And I gotta say, you guys, they did not give me this information. I think that I had said to them, like, I don't need mosquito spray now, because in my mind I thought I'll save it for later when the mosquitoes are bad. But neither of them bothered to announce to me, like, the spray's all gone. And so I'm just kind of like living my life, and they're all like, oh, the mosquitoes. I'm like, no big deal in my head. Once they get bad, I will put on some mosquito spray. Not a problem.
And so we started to head towards the wash where we had entered the table. We were able to route find and get to the correct area and then start our descent. And it seemed like as I led our group down the wash, I think any mosquitoes that were in the rocks or the grass or brush were kind of like stirred up by my presence. And I just felt like I was collecting them all as I was like going down. And it's like you only have one hand free to even swat at them because you're holding on to rocks and trees. And the further we went, the more mosquitoes were stirred up. And I swear it was like Pigpen and Charlie Brown, how he has the cloud of dirt. That was how the mosquitoes were like just swarming around me. So I was starting to go just wild, like slapping, like kind of being like, ah, like these mosquitoes. Ah. And Carrie and Rachel are behind me.
So I think that Rachel had the second most mosquitoes because she was second. But then I think they all were like cleared out. Like they'd all connected themselves to Molly and Rachel by the time I'd come through. So I'm like going down third, and I'm a little nervous about my footing, and I'm a little annoyed because Molly's like running down this hill that's very unstable. And I'm like, what, I can't even see you. And then she's like going like, oh, no. And I was just like, this girl needs to get a handle on herself because I have like 4 mosquitoes that have even bothered me today. So she is just crazy. And my second thought is like, this girl's carrying the mosquito spray. Why doesn't she just stop and put on the mosquito spray? I don't know what her problem is. So we descended the whole thing like that. And I mean, the mosquitoes were, I remember them being thicker in that area than in the trees, which I will say, the GPS marking was awesome because we had a good spot on which to drop down into the wash. We knew we had a good spot like to go down without getting cliffed out. And I don't know if I mean, hopefully I would have recognized those geological features otherwise, but I would say I would definitely recommend that. I did it on my inReach.
And I never trust myself to recognize those features. Yeah. I'm pretty good at navigating, but it's like I'd never want to leave it up to just my brain. Why not do something else?
And I did that on my inReach, so then I had that on my phone. Yeah. Which, by the way, I think this whole trip, I pretty much was just using the map that came with my inReach, and that's how we were just navigating. I didn't have a GPS line on it because I didn't know how to do that. But at least it tells you your position on the actual topographical map, and then that way you can kind of tell like what's higher, what's lower. And I think I kind of was using that throughout this entire trip. So that's just one little tidbit.
Yeah, so we made it back down to Upper Table Lake, and I think our plan was, to replenish our water supply and then just really hit the gas and haul to our car. And the mosquitoes were now bothering everyone because we had all stopped and brought our collection of mosquitoes from the entire wash to the lake with us as we filtered. And Carrie was thinking about, well, why don't we use the spray?
I finally was like, hey guys, why don't we just break out the mosquito spray? Like, they're starting to irritate me now too. And they were like, what are you talking about? We used up the last of the mosquito spray all the way back up on the table. And I was a little bit like, are you serious right now? There's 0 mosquito spray? So I don't even think I think we filled a little bit of our water. I don't think we filled them full.
But I'm confused because we must have gotten like a little bit off track at Upper Table because we filled up our water. But then I remember we must have been, I don't know. There was like the lake and then the trail. So we're going to walk across this grassy area. And then all of a sudden, instead of a grassy area, it was kind of watery. And I walked in it and then my foot sunk in the moss. So I think I was like almost shin deep in the water. And then we still didn't quite know where the trail was. But like when we looked at our GPS, it was kind of like just above us. So we kind of walked through like a bushwhack through some trees and then connected to it. So I don't know how we got off track, but then we were finally ready to just hit the trail walking hard.
Yeah, I do remember that. We literally traveled parallel to the trail, but probably 10 feet under it. And I think then we just were like, this is getting so dumb when we checked our map. And then we were like, oh, we're like spot on. Like we honestly probably could have paralleled it for the rest of the way, but it would have just been way more irritating than actually being on the trail and probably less a higher impact. Yeah. So basically the rest of that trail, you just repeat what you already did. You see what you already saw. It's equally stunning. It's equally fun because you've been up on the table now and you can be like, I was up there. And I'm actually remembering now. So the view of the table that you get there is beautiful, but there's a better view that I've still yet to see. And it's on the Pacific Crest Trail. It's like this little outlet where you can see kind of the Cathedral Rocks and the table and Goat Peak and Mount Jefferson. And if you've seen a stunning photo of the Mount Jefferson Wilderness from someone on the Pacific Crest Trail, it was probably there if it wasn't at like Jefferson, Park or whatever. But I remember that when we invited Rachel on this trip, I'll have to dig that up and post it, but I sent her this picture of 3 stick figures on top of that view of the trail. And I said to her, like, you're invited or something like that to be up here this week. So then it was kind of fun to have made it back down. And it's like we knew we were going to make it back to the trailhead barring any freak accident because we'd already done the terrain. So we knew what it was like. Yeah. But it was so hot. It was like, I don't know. We're not hot weather girls. I'm going to tell you right now. Like, we may have complained sometimes about being cold when we sleep, but the biggest thing ever is I like my walking temperatures to be anywhere between like 40 and 60 degrees. Yeah. That is Carrie's happiest walking temperature.
Honestly, like 48 degrees is so wonderful because you can with sun, that's probably my favorite walking temperature.
Yeah. So I think we were just planning to blast it out of there. But when we got to Carl Lake, I was like, I'm so hot. We're ahead of schedule. Yeah. We descended the switchbacks, which is more fun than ascending them and faster. Yeah. And so I think we all were like, you know what? We can take a little break and we can just go for a swim. And I have to say, that is like the crown jewel of all my swimming experiences. I love swimming in Carl Lake. And I've only done it that once. But if I could go back to any one lake, it'd be that one because the water like kind of drops off very nicely. It's sand when you get in somehow, or it feels like sand. Yeah. So you're not walking in weird muck. And then you just get to swim in this cold, clear lake where you can just see the lake bed way below you. It was super fun.
And it was really blue. And the best thing ever was that you could submerge basically your entire body so that only the ears and the eyes and nose could be attacked by the voracious cloud of mosquitoes. It was just kind of like my head was just kind of sticking out as I'm treading water. But then you could get away from the mosquitoes for a couple moments. But we really enjoyed that. And the water was icy cold, which also felt good on my very achy muscles because this was day 4 of like being thrown back into backpacking for the season. So it felt very, very fun.
So once you get to Carl Lake, it's just a few more miles to your car. And we were kind of retracing our steps past the little extra lakes and past Cabot Lake. And as we walked past them, I remember obviously there's so many mosquitoes. You're just ready to get to the car. It's super hot. But as we were almost to our car, like I'd say less than a half mile, and in kind of that brushy area where you can't really see that much around you, but you can see the trail just fine, there was this guy and he came up to us and he looked so panicked and he was like, I can't find my family. They were feeling tired or something. And so I said, let me just go on ahead. Cause he was, I don't know, I think he wanted to go on ahead and look at the lakes. And so he left them somewhere. And when he came back, they weren't there. And so he was kind of he was like, I've been running back and forth and I haven't seen them. Have you seen like a woman and 2 younger children? And I'm worried about them and we don't have enough water and I left my pack with them and I can't communicate with them. And unfortunately, we hadn't seen those people. And so I just kind of remember we tried to discuss with him about like what he thought he should do. And we offered to help him search, I think. And he just said, no, like it'll be fine. But he didn't have any water with him. So I remember we filled up at that time. We were still bringing bottled Gatorade with us, you guys. We were not bringing electrolyte packets. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine that now. And if you would have told me that I used to do that, I would have been like, yeah, right. But I saw a picture of myself drinking out of a bottle of Gatorade. So I think we filled up all our Gatorade bottles with water and we gave those to him. And I think I actually also gave him one of our Sawyer Squeeze packs with water in it still.
Maybe so.
I don't know. But because we had one that was clean water, I think, and one that was dirty. So I gave him our clean water one. And, then we kind of went on our way. And I don't know, maybe now I would stay and help. I'm not quite sure. It's so challenging when you can't communicate with your family member. But when we got back to the parking lot, he had described which car was his. And we left a note on the vehicle that just basically said the date that we'd seen them. And like, if this car is still in the parking lot by basically the next day, like, please call search and rescue, I think, right?
And so that's just another kind of a here we had our adventure into the wilderness. We'd done some off trail, and at the time going up and down the wash, I mean, in the back of your mind, you think like, okay, I gotta make sure that I'm extra safe and not doing anything stupid because I don't want to lose my footing and like, break a bone or something because
you don't want to get eaten by mosquitoes.
Because you don't want to get eaten by mosquitoes, and then you also don't want to have to initiate search and rescue. But the mosquitoes thing is valid, Carrie. So we were like finishing the trail and, really excited, and then had this interaction that was just a good reminder of, some of those basic principles that are so easy to throw to the wind. But staying together as a group is one thing, especially if you don't have a communication device to reach each member of your group. And then even just thinking about going. It was like 86 degrees, I want to say, when we were getting to the trailhead. We got back to the car at noon. And so making sure that you bring more water and more food than you think that you might need just because, you're in a wilderness area. So kind of like a little bit of a important reminder at the end of our kind of triumphant trip here.
Yeah. And overall, I would just say what an awesome feeling we had where we went out and we did something that we'd never done before, and we saw a place that we wanted to see. And one thing that I think I forgot to mention is we have one of the pictures, or we have a picture of that Molly saw of the people who had been on the table like in the 1980s. And we have a similar picture that we took, not on purpose to copycat, but it's so interesting to compare the area and see like the difference in the forest from like wildfires and the difference in Mount Jefferson in terms of, I think they might have gone at a different time of year than us, but in terms of like snowpack and glaciation and all that stuff. I mean, it's so cool to be able to see that. And there is nothing I love more than old photos of places that I've been. So that was just, I don't know, it was so special to go somewhere that I'd wanted to go for so long, and to actually be able to correctly assess myself and know my limits and know that I could do something and then do it.
And it's kind of cool to think because every backpacking trip is in itself a formative experience, and you never reach some pinnacle where you're not learning anymore. But I'm thinking about how we started this podcast to talk about our time on the John Muir Trail and to help other people kind of plan for that trip. And then we decided that we actually really like talking about these things and, bringing in other wilderness areas and other trips and stories. And so I'm thinking about this trip in itself and how at the time it was such a new concept for us, like being off trail, but there were so many things that we were, I don't know, just like learning and developing and growing that kind of then set us up for success as we did other bigger trails down the road. But at the same time, it's not like this trail dulls in comparison to something like the JMT. Like it has its own really cool features that you can't find anywhere else but on the southeast side of Mount Jefferson. And yeah, it just makes me feel really kind of like privileged and blessed to have the ability to experience things like that.
And I think sometimes people get hung up on like through hiking is the coolest form of backpacking, or like ultralight is so important. But at the end of the day, I think the coolest thing is anybody who gets out and does a backpacking trip and enjoys themselves and comes home with good stories and is safe and assesses themselves correctly. Like all of that's awesome. And all of your experiences, whether it was on a 3-month or 5-month hike, or whether it was on a 1-night hike, is still worthwhile. And I think we did get a lot of comments from people when we were going crazy like this, doing just like the 1 nights that were so long, like, why would you do this? Why would you do this? But some of these places that we went, like Goat Rocks in Washington, are places that we would never have gone to except for maybe had we been people who had done the Pacific Crest Trail, and we didn't have to spend 5 months of our life to see them, which is awesome when people do that. I would love to do that, but I don't think that's ever something that I actually want to do. So we got to see all these bits and pieces of some of the most stunning geography just by being willing to suffer some weird discomfort and just jam pack experiences together. So, I mean, for a long time, we were just weekend warriors, backpackers. And that was, we got to experience
for
so
us
many
at
things.
the time, right? Yeah. And it was really, really cool. And reflecting on this experience, once again, it just brings about kind of a sense of happiness. And once again, if you'd like to recreate in that kind of southeastern area of Mount Jefferson, the Save Our Eastern Cascade Trails is a great Facebook page to follow. Once again, if you're in that area and you want to get connected with them for volunteerism, we think it's a great organization, although we never were connected with it in a volunteer aspect. And then if you do have questions for us, feel free to send us a message too, because we'd love to have a conversation about it.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the
Two Sisters on Adventures podcast.
we hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, you can do the thing that Molly asked you to do at the very beginning, where you rate or review the podcast. And if you want to see pictures or videos of the things that we talked about today, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Two Sisters on Adventures. Thanks so much for listening, guys.
Bye.